And here we go. Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. Hopefully, we will be joined by co-host Bess Goden in a little bit. And my guest today is longtime friend of the show and colleague Connor Exum. And we are going to be talking local politics and town supervisor races in Windham, New York. Which is exciting to me because for some weird reason, I love local politics.
Who doesn't love local politics?
The Democratic Party.
No, they don't. But I mean, it's where you can get the most done if you actually do things right.
Well, I mean, they accomplished a whole lot of the modernization of urban planning was accomplished by the so-called sewer socialists in local government around the turn of the century in 1920s. So that absolutely makes sense.
You know, I mean, it's probably the reason why the Democrats don't like it now, because it actually works. You know, anything that actually works, they're like, no, we got to go for that flashier thing up there.
Well, now that you mention it, one of the products of that first socialist era was the North Dakota State Bank.
I know.
And while Democrats and liberals and socialists have no power in North Dakota, the Republicans have never gotten rid of the North Dakota State Bank because it's too good for everybody.
That's true. And, you know, I mean, and North Dakota had a huge socialist population in the turn of the century.
Yes.
I mean, the Granger movement was big in the 19th century there. They had, in North Dakota, until recently, they had a cooperative company that was making flour and wheat products. They finally got bought up by a large conglomerate, but for like 90 years or something ridiculous like that, they had this cooperative that was working well.
Well, I mean, the whole there was a whole farm labor movement in the upper Midwest during that period of time. That's why the Democratic State Party in Minnesota is called the Farmer Labor Party, because the Democratic Party of the state actually ceased to exist, and a socialist party called the Farm and Labor Party took over the Democratic Party in the state. Now, obviously, eventually they became co-opted. But it's also worth noting that Minnesota was still giving us people like Paul Wellstone back in the 90s.
Yes. And now they're giving us, well, not that.
Tim Walz is no Paul Wellstone. This is true. Tim Walz, speaking of local government, though more state, but still, Tim Walz called out the National Guard to kill us during the George Floyd uprisings, and we should never forget that.
No, we shouldn't. I mean, the whole Minnesota reaction during the George Floyd was kind of bizarre. I mean, on one hand, you have the local politicians trying to co-opt it and turn it into a pro-police movement.
Yes.
And saying that they're going to defund the cops, but what they really meant was that they were going to defund like the social programs and then give them more armored vehicles.
Yeah, it was a really weird and messed up. But you have to understand that for all the history that we're talking about, Minneapolis is also the home of Target. Target is a major funder of the Minneapolis Police Department and of many politicians across the state of Minnesota.
Sure. And Pillsbury.
Yes.
I mean, and neither one of those two companies want to see social awareness that might affect their bottom line in any way at any time.
This is absolutely true.
I mean, so it's so funny that you mentioned that, because just recently I was on Facebook searching through the Democratic Party of Greene County, which is the county I'm in, and which is the county Windham's in, which is the town that I'm starting my campaign to run for town supervisor. And we were applauding the fact that whether it was Oklahoma or Ohio, was getting an armored vehicle from the military due to the Biden's program for, what does he call it now? I mean, it was Build Back Better. It's been a whole bunch of names. I think it's now the Inflation
The Inflation Reduction Act was the final version that passed, the so-called greatest climate bill of our era.
That's right.
That even the co-opted Democratic Party climate movement said had more bad in it than good, that the good in it was completely outweighed by the bad, and that it was really a step back despite all the good things in the bill.
That's right. Well, that's because it had like a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio of bad policies to good policies.
And to put the cherry on top of everything, to get it passed, a bunch of the goods, the best of the good stuff was taken out, and an additional bad thing was added in the form of a pipeline for Joe Manchin.
That's right.
And Joe Manchin still left the Democratic Party and went independent.
Yes. Well, I mean, that's going to turn to be for a guy who had marginal power always, he's just really slit his wrists on that.
Well, device. I mean, his power always came from being a Democrat. Being an independent was completely cutting away his own power base. West Virginia is not Maine. He's not going to Angus King his way into a new political career.
No.
Unless, for those who don't understand what I'm saying, Angus King was a Maine Republican who was being phased out by a Republican Party that was too right wing for him.
That's right.
And he found new life by becoming an independent and caucusing with the Democrats, despite still being a very conservative Maine Republican in 9 out of 10 ways.
Yeah, well, but on the really important bills, he tends to go back to the Republicans.
Yes.
When he can.
Yes. Anytime he can, Angus King goes back to the Republicans. So you have to remember that Angus King Angus King originally ran for governor of Maine to stop Susan Collins from winning the Republican nomination.
Yes.
And then he ran for governor as an independent against Susan Collins when she beat him in the Republican nomination, and won with a large combination of traditional Democrats and traditional non-voters who were wowed by an independent on the ballot. And then he pretty much became just another Republican governor of Maine. Yeah.
I mean, he's walked a little closer to the Democrats in Congress, but not much.
Well, what it comes down to is he agrees with the Democrats on the traditional national security stuff that some of the crazier Republicans have backed away from. And he thinks that it is bad for politics to whip up the crazies about abortion and queer bashing. He's not necessarily pro-abortion or pro-queer rights. He thinks it's bad politics to whip up the crazies.
Well, yeah, it's because he knows the crazies. He can't control the crazies.
Which, that's one thing. He's one step ahead of 90% of the Republican Party and 95% of the Democrats. So.
Well, the problem is that the Republican Party in whole has so long embraced the crazy.
Yes.
That now that's all they have left to talk to.
Well, and the trouble is that the Democratic Party has been playing this game of appealing to the middle for so long that they're now trying to appeal to the moderate crazies.
That's right. It's the same thing that happened in Spain in like the 1870s. You had these two parties. One was the ultra conservative, and then there was the so-called liberal party, and they kept on revolving around electing each other. Each time they did, the liberal party got a little more to the right and a little more by the time you reach like 1910, there's no difference between the two parties.
Well, I mean, you got to remember that we're talking about Spain, where the big liberal question was, can a woman be the reigning monarch?
True.
And this question was settled in favor of the liberals by a civil war where the liberals were helped by a British military institution that was a heavily anglicized Spanish military institution, I should say, I'm sorry, left over from the Napoleonic Wars. Mm-hmm. And those those internal conflicts were in the end decided by military generals who were high Tories.
Sure. But what I was just getting at is that the Democratic Party is filling that same basic function that they had in the Liberal Party, where, it's really not a fight for liberal ideas
Queen
or
Isabella,
freedom.
not King Charles.
That's right. But look at that woman out of Missouri, Valencia Gomez. I mean, who just straight up says what the queer bashing out loud.
Well, the guy who's running for governor of North Carolina, whose argument is essentially we've ended racism because now I, a black man, can be a white supremacist too.
That is true.
And that very interesting attitude I imagine that very interesting attitude in politics escapes me. But let's get to what we were supposed to talk about, which is tell me about the local politics of Windham, New York, and this town supervisor race. I know that this is you're doing sort of a weird role reversal and appealing to the part-time residents and gentrifiers here, and I'm kind of curious about that.
Well, I'm not looking for the true gentrifiers. I'm looking for the part-time residents that actually want to be part of the town.
And that makes sense. The people who consider themselves part of the community and not outsiders, I suppose.
I'm not looking for the ones who want to, build the $1 million house because they want to pretend that this is Aspen 2.0, and they want to, rent it out 4 or 5 times a year for like $8,000 a weekend and make a lot of money on it. No, I'm looking for the ones that have come up here, have put down their roots, sort of say, and are really active in the community, but aren't getting the representation that they that they really deserve. I mean, basically, the town has, well, depending on which census estimate you want to use, the 2020 says we have 1,708. The updated residents, census estimate in 2022 says we have 1,611.
1,611 people in the town
that live, yes, full time.
That's a small town.
Oh yeah, this is a very small town.
Now, by comparison, I want to note that Brad Paisley came from a suburb of 50,000 people, and his song about small towns makes very little sense. And I don't think that he was talking about Windham, New York either. I think he believes all small towns are in Mississippi.
That's true. Or, what about Staten Island? That's their slogan, is that America's biggest small town, and they got like 3 million people.
And they're a borough of the biggest city in the country.
Yeah, that's right. So the politics here are strange. So you have the very hardcore locals, and they like to trace their roots back to 1798 when the town was formed by this guy named Osborne.
Which, to be fair, I understand to some degree, because my wife, on her father's side, comes from a family in Lake Oswego, New York, that can trace itself back to Puritans in England before the Mayflower.
Wow.
The Orchids.
Wow. But you get what it is. So they're the ones that like to control the town. Right. Yeah. They're the ones who believe that they've got the birthright, quite literally. I mean, this is a birthright kind of operation going on. And they believe that what they want is the most important and the best because they've been here since the dawn of time, as they like to think.
It's their town, and they know what's best for them.
Right. But they've also been selling the town off for the last 150 years to all of these new people that come in.
Let me stop you there, but my assumption is that they would have to sell the town off, because if you're going from 1,700 odd to 1,600 odd people, that doesn't sound like economic or demographic growth.
No, it's not. And what happens is that who buys up are either equity firms, second homeowners, And that's where we have the fight. We have the fight between who gets to be the more important second homeowner. Because we got a lot of second homeowners who are transitioning to becoming primary households here.
Yep.
And that's who I want to go after, those people, because they want to invest their time, they want to invest their effort, and they should have a voice. I mean, even if you stay only 2 weeks of the year, you should still have a voice. You're paying taxes. There's something that you should be able to have here. But if you go to our town supervisor meetings at the town board, they just shut you down. You're not allowed to really voice your opinion. I mean, they listen, sort of. There's two guys that are perennially behind a computer screen for no reason. I think they're just watching cat videos or something. I can't figure it out. Maybe chit-chatting with the wife something.
What's the line from the first Avengers movie? That man is playing Gallagher. He thought we wouldn't catch him, but we
probably. I mean, you can't tell. I mean, and that's bizarre to me, I mean, it's bizarre to me that we have meetings that last 5 minutes sometimes because there's no topics supposedly in the planning board. So you read their minutes and it's like they started.
Absolutely no public business for the town supervisors to talk about.
Well, I mean, that's what they want. They want it like that. A few years ago, they came up with this. This is a page out of our so-called comprehensive plan, and what it says, while tourism has and will continue to be the dominant industry in Windham, there is an identified need to diversify the local economy, and then they just haven't done anything in 2 years.
Yeah, identified need to diversify the local economy.
Nothing.
Stop. Yeah.
Stop. So we did. We
identified the need. Maybe we'll do something about it someday.
Right. I mean, so they decided that the best.
So let me go ahead and ask you another question then.
Sure.
I know this is the issue that got you to run, so I might as well bring it up and lead with it. What are the thoughts about how this planned Little League sports complex will help diversify the local economy? Are they planning to see a huge increase in tourism from people who want to catch the Little League games?
That actually isn't the issue that got me in.
Fair enough.
That's the issue that just got. I mean, for years I've been sitting around telling how I would reorganize things,
sure.
And finally I decided that I would start to act. I have this weird theory that if you talk about it long enough, eventually you should probably, try and do it.
Yeah.
So I got up and I joined this group called Preserve the Path. They want to use the 68-acre path area that is really popular. And the problem is it's really popular with second homeowners, tourists, and transplants.
Of course.
And they want to put this massive Little League.
But isn't a place really popular with tourists good for an economy that depends entirely on tourism?
You would think that. You would think that would be, and that's
I'm not trying to second guess your brilliant town supervisors, of course. That's your job. But I'm asking.
I asked the same question several times. I mean, we have a low cost asset here that can be leveraged with cheap farmer markets, actually bringing in more money than they cost to do.
Yeah.
I mean, a little mowing, and then you charge them $50, $60, maybe $100 a spot. You get 100, 200 vendors, and now people can go walk through the path, enjoy that, get a cup of overpriced organic coffee, and go on back to their hotel rooms and feel good about themselves because they're drinking coffee from Green Mountain, Vermont, instead of, Nestle's sweatshops in Puerto Rico.
Makes sense.
And that's great. Our town said no. They looked at me like I had three heads. They were looking, I mean, you think we should do that? Why would we do that? Could we put this beautiful field in? And the field is just a money pit. And the odd thing is we already have a Little League field. We have another location that we call Creamery Pond, because apparently somewhere in the 1800s there actually was an actual creamery there. We had a dairy farm. And That has a softball field that could be easily renovated and used for t-ball. Right.
Yeah.
We have another location we call CD Lane Park, which through some modifications we can make that very respectable, and a little adaptation of our present field, because the issue is really over parking, and we have 0.59 acres behind the Little League field that we're not using, that we could use for parking effectively. And some of it we'd have to mow a little differently, but I mean, that is not the end all problem. So that we can put more cars in there.
We'll have to mow the lawn a little differently. How tragic.
Right. And we have the pavilion already that they want. And we could I used to install hood systems. I spec'd it all out. A kitchen for them would cost us $30,000. We're not talking about a new pavilion, which the prices I've looked up recently range from $85,000 to $500,000, depending on what you want.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have that. Why aren't we using these assets? And we could fit all of that in there. But here's the real thing about this. They want it in that path area because they want to really say to the town, it's ours, and we will destroy whatever we want or build whatever we want. And it's for the locals, not for you new people, not for you transplants, not for you one-generation locals like me. I'm not a local, really.
And who cares that our only economic support is tourism? Fuck you, tourists.
Bingo. Yeah, it's a big one to that. And it's, it's got all that. And it's a natural reaction to the fact that our town is losing control. We are losing control. So yes, I want to engage with those secondary homeowners, but I also feel that we have 1,611 people. The smallest groups, demographically speaking, are the people between the ages of 0 and 20. They make up less than 30% of the whole population. Our biggest groups are 40 through 65, and they make up roughly 54%. So we need to get a fast infusion of people in the ages of 20 to 35 who are going to have kids, because right now our school district has 277 kids in it. 295 if you count the kids that go off to a charter school.
I suppose that if you're the locals, I suppose you could claim that building a state-of-the-art Little League facility will make families with kids want to move to your excellent sports environment.
That might be true if you have more jobs, but we've already identified that the job prospects are not very good.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. You would need to have some sort of jobs to get people with kids, because people who have kids have to be able to work to be able to feed their kids.
Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking that they don't really care that much about a $1.5 to $3 million setup, depending on how lavish we go. And our supervisor's been saying phrases like the envy of everyone who sees it. So the implication is that he's going to spend quite a bit of money to make sure that everyone who sees it says, wow.
I'm originally from Los Angeles, so while I'm used to this discussion on a larger scale, I actually understand sports facilities being central to local politics.
Oh yeah.
We had for years and years and years. This is the fundamental reason that besides the fact that the Davis family is completely unstable, which is another argument entirely. But one of the fundamental reasons that the Raiders did not stay in Los Angeles very long was because they didn't like the stadium that was supposed to be temporary, the LA Coliseum at Exposition Park. That was built for the Los Angeles Olympics.
I know.
Not the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics. The first one.
Now to be the third one.
Yeah. But yeah, no, the first Los Angeles Olympics
What was that about?
19. Let me
What
look
was that
that
like?
up. Actually,
That had to be like 1930 or something.
I'm going to look that up because that's a good question. 1932.
Right, because I thought it was the same year that
right before the famous 36 Olympics.
Right, I thought it was it corresponded with America got both of them because we had the 32 Olympics up in Lake Placid in New York,
Yep.
and LA got the Summer Olympics. It was
Yep.
the coastal, And
then of course Lake Placid would get them again in 1980 and Los Angeles again in 84. But yeah, the Los Angeles Coliseum was built for the 1932 Olympics. Had improvements for the Los Angeles Dodgers in the 1950s, but those improvements did not necessarily make it better for football teams.
No.
The Dodgers didn't stay there very long, of course. They went to Dodger Stadium. The Raiders moved to the Coliseum. The Davis family did not like the Coliseum. There were complaints about the facilities being archaic, probably because, again, built for the 1932 Los Angeles Olympics. It was not a new facility, even by the standards of the NFL at the time. But at the same time, there was a deadlock on the city. There was basically an impossibility of authorizing any lease anywhere else in the city for a football stadium, because the city councilman from that neighborhood, Exposition Park, wasn't going to let a football team play anywhere but the Coliseum. He was going to oppose it no matter what anywhere else, because he believed that his neighborhood needed that NFL money, and that if his neighborhood couldn't get that NFL money, no neighborhood was going to get that NFL money.
That's kind of the attitude we have here.
And that was the central wrangling of the NFL in Los Angeles after the Raiders left. Just like, no, they have to come to Exposition Park. They can't play anywhere else. And no owners wanted to play in Exposition Park.
Yeah.
And the city, for understandable reasons, did not want to demolish the Olympic Coliseum and build a new facility. They actually wanted to respect their history, which, is sort of admirable in a way when you consider how many places have demolished a public landmark and ponied up public money for what ends up being essentially a private stadium.
Well, yeah, that's one of the problems with the whole Olympic thing is
and what they ended up doing in Inglewood essentially again was licensing a private stadium with public money.
And that's essentially what this is, right? This is going to be a large investment for the Little League, which is, again, I mean, it's not against Little League rules, but the Little League rules is that you can play anywhere you want, where you can find a state, where you can find.
I remember that there was a question about Little League rules that you asked some other town supervisors, that was raising questions about whether or not you were some sort of weird agent provocateur working for someone.
that was actually the Little League board.
Oh, okay.
Right.
The Little League board thought you were an agent provocateur?
They've decided that, yes, that I'm unprofessional for asking questions.
I mean, as an independent local journalist and potential candidate for town supervisor, asking questions is sort of expected, right?
Well, they didn't know that at the time, but yeah, I mean, I was just asking questions as a normal citizen, which,
they hate it when normal citizens ask questions.
That's definitely no. And so I was told that, and what I was asking was, how far you felt you could tweak the rules that come out of, the Little League, because they let them have a little wiggle room in your bylaws.
The new social engineering would almost have to, sorry, this just popped out of nowhere, but the new social engineering, in order to get somewhere with today's bureaucratic functionary, might almost have to be something like, yeah, I'm a private investigator working for an insurance company and we're looking into.
Pretty much. You can't be covered unless.
And at some point you have to mention the word liability and then they'll answer whatever you ask.
That is true. So, I mean, they have these rules that they can tweak around. Like, can the kid steal a base on a third pitch strike that's dropped? Yes or no, right? You can tweak your league so that, okay, if you're playing with like 4 and 6 year olds, that might get a little confusing and you might have kids running like after the third pitch all the time. So you can say no. Or you can say, they can only take a lead after the pitcher is starting his motions.
Well, if you want to go to official rules of baseball,
right? But
I hate being a sports nerd and not being a sports fan. It's hilarious. But if you want to go by official rules of baseball, if it's a third strike and the catcher drops it,
you're right. You take the base.
The runner and only the runner can steal first, and they can try to throw him. The batter rather, and only the batter can try to steal first. Anyone who's on first can advance, but unless there's somebody, but you can't. Anyway, never mind.
Well, the point is that you can tweak these minor rules.
Yes, you can tweak these minor rules in order to make it easier for the kids.
Right, so that the kids aren't like trying to hit each other, throwing out a runner in that situation, or running all the time if they're very young.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked him that, and he went ballistic. I didn't like kids. I didn't like, baseball. I didn't like America. I mean, and he didn't realize that I grew up with a baseball coach who was a minor league baseball player. I played baseball. I didn't particularly like the competition, but as sports go, that would have probably been the one I would have played if we, just for fun. I do like baseball actually better than most.
Yeah, if you were actually to go by X, Y, and Z, you do understand. Well, I this is just me. But somebody, you hate baseball, you hate America. You do understand that the NFL is actually the national pastime now by the numbers, right?
Yeah, or stock car. Stock car was very big for a while.
Yes, the NASCAR dads were a political phenomenon for W. Bush.
They were, and now I think that the new rising star is actually Formula One. So, God forbid, I guess we're all going to be
the most upper class sport in history is the rising sport in America. Okay,
I guess that means we should all become European socialists if you're using that logic, right? Like he is. I'm just saying that maybe you should take your field and use one that we already have, refurbish it so that we don't damage something that we can't replace easily.
Baseball socialism, let the kids run the Little League.
Well, I mean, it would probably be better.
It probably would, but
you wouldn't have 4 adults running over there going, he was safe. He was out.
It's really ironic because, and this is not what it's meant for. It's meant to teach you about Christianity and being a good Christian who loves your neighbors. But there's this kids series called Dallas O'Neill and the Baker Street Sports Club, which just has these wonderful anarcho-socialist values because the kids run their own sports teams and finance their own and find ways to finance their own equipment and vote on their own members. And there are no adults running their team at all. Well, the kids do it all themselves.
I don't think that's, it's not so fanciful because like if you grew
I
up,
don't think it is.
If you grew up in the 60s, like my 50s and 60s, like my parents did, my father used to play Sandlot, and that's how they did it. Right? They all, like the whole street, got together one day and said, "Okay, we're gonna play baseball, and these guys are gonna be on that team. That guy's gonna be on that team, and we're gonna go find a place." And they just found some lot, and they called it,
Well, I mean, that's how baseball started. I mean, baseball started with what was called town ball, which was everybody in town getting together, sometimes 20 and 30 to a side. And sometimes, as many as 6 bases originally.
I know.
It was very chaotic when it started. And just playing.
Yeah.
And the rules grew up over time.
I still think it's the fact that we've outlawed the ability to hit the batter, to throw the base player out by hitting him with the ball is just wrong. We need that dodgeball-like element.
Yeah, soaking the runner. But no, that was one of the first changes the National Association of Baseball Players made to the rules when they codified them in 1867. Is they said you can tag the runner, you can force the runner out, you cannot throw at the base runner. This is bad for their safety.
Yeah, it is, but it must have been hysterical, right? I mean, you could just see the fights that had to come out of that.
Well, yes, that was part of the reason that they ruled against it. Also, the fact that while this doesn't get talked about a lot, if you've ever seen The Natural,
yes,
Robert Redford, where in both the book and the movie, the hero gets called up to the majors because an outfielder goes through the outfield fence and dies.
Yep.
Then while that was not an everyday occurrence, you have to understand that job safety was a big concern for player safety. I don't want to say job safety because the NABPP's rules were that all players had to be amateurs still in 1867. But they were very interested in player safety because they were a player-run organization. And they did not want players getting killed as often as players had been getting killed. They wanted players to get killed less.
Hard to get players.
In that same meeting, not to give them too much credit, this is the same meeting where they voted, because we are not a political organization and we do not want to divide players on the principles of partisan politics, we are going to remain neutral on the question of civil rights for Black Americans by just not allowing them to join our organization. How is that neutral, sir?
It's not.
That's taking a side. You're opposing civil rights now.
Well, you wrote a good article about that, actually, on Patreon.
I did.
I read it.
I thought it was good.
Yeah, I mean, but that was the big thing was that they didn't want the northern teams to go down to the south with black players and then they'd get into a riot.
That was part of it, but there was more.
But they also didn't want the northern teams having a riot.
What they were worried about, and I'm glad you bring this up because this is something that you see in politics at every level, usually because some majority is determined to inflict their will on a minority. You see this idea that standing up for the rights of the person whose rights are being shoved aside to accommodate the majority is divisive.
Yes.
So, and then the question becomes, well, who do people not want to divide? Who are we talking about keeping united? And it always becomes, well, we don't want to divide white people against the status quo and have them side with people who are shut out of the system.
Right. And
which is to say, they want to keep white people unified to prevent the unification of the international working class.
True.
That's my little class warrior thing for the day.
Well, no, that's going to come back. Because what we have here in Windham is essentially an oligarchy, right, of the town's members being all the true birthright people.
If you will forgive me for talking this way about upstate New York, the people who now see themselves as the patroons.
Yes. Well, we were right in the rent war. That was happening. That was happening like 10 miles from here in a big way. Not so much in Windham itself, but all around us, Schoharie County, Rensselaer. Those are all 10, 20 minutes away.
Well, of course, Rensselaer. I mean,
Yeah.
I know who Philip Rensselaer was. He was Alexander Hamilton's father-in-law.
Mm-hmm. Wonder why he got a county named after him. But
it's funny how all that works out.
So yeah, I mean, all this property was all owned. All these towns were part of Woodstock originally.
I'm sorry, yes. Philip Schuyler. Never mind, I'm confusing. Philip Van Schuyler was the father-in-law, but there's a Schuyler County too. So
yes, there is. It's further up.
Yes.
So they were all connected. We were all one big place a long time ago.
Yes.
And then what happened is moneyed interest started to come in. First, it was like the tanning industry in the 1820s, right? And that's how we got Prattsville.
You had that big conflict between the moneyed interests and the landed interests in upstate New York from the very beginning.
Oh, sure.
And even then, between the English and Dutch landed interests, because when Thomas Jefferson's vice president, Henry Clinton, said that he was proud to be a plebeian, he did not mean that he was some poor working class guy. He meant that he had an English accent instead of a Dutch accent.
That's right. Dutch money was a big thing, but the same could be said about north south of us down New York City.
Yes,
that was where the Dutch influence was so strong in those counties up to Columbia and Dutchess County.
Yes,
and that's where the Livingstons, they even though they have an English name, they actually had most of their wealth came from the Dutch relatives that they first had.
They married they married into Dutch families on their mothers and grandmothers' side, and inherited all that Dutch money after the English took over.
That's right.
Which is another great comparison in Southern California, east of LA, where I come from, San Bernardino County. The first great round of white American landowners all married the heiresses of old Spanish dons who had kept their land claims into the Mexican period. And so rather than have to dispossess people as people did up near Los Angeles and San Francisco and got violent, they just married people's daughters and inherited.
That's right. So we got that. And that's how the town actually formed. It's a piece of Livingston property that was formed out of it. It concluded Woodstock until like 1802, and finally we broke off. And then in the 1830s, we had all these timber and tanning companies come in because they used the hemlock to make the tanning of hides. And so for like 30 years, they clear cut the whole entire mountain, and that damage lasted for almost 150 years. It wasn't until the New Deal and the Conservation Corps that we started to actually get all the forests that we have now today. That's only 90 years old. So we've done this. We know what this looks like.
Basically, so they restored the environment
right
during the New Deal.
That's right.
And of course, because the wealthy want to undo the New Deal, I imagine that means somebody wants to destroy that environment again.
Oh, sure, and that's part of it, right? And this town hates FDR, hates him.
Of course.
I don't know how many times I go when I'm doing the polls, right? I'm a poll worker. I will have somebody come up to me and say, "My grandmother hated FDR. I can't stand Democrats." Okay. And I'm on the Democratic side because you have to have 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. I'm registered as that just because I like to vote, and I get a couple $100 for just sitting there for 15 hours. It's interesting.
I used to do the poll worker thing.
Yeah, you know what it's like. It's interesting.
It was very interesting.
From a sociological standpoint, you get to see, what's really going on, and people tell you a lot more than you'd think when you're there.
But it's like you notice we talk about class. and this matters in local politics because the organizations are local, and it affects state and national politics because elections are locally run and administered. But it's like the ruling class social organs, your Rotarians, your Eagles, your Lions, your various public interest clubs that do good.
Chambers of Commerce
require their members to vote or be fined.
I didn't know that. Chamber members.
I found that out in a conversation because I worked at a precinct that was in the upper class part of my community, despite living in the lower class part most of the time. And I was listening to a conversation between a couple of the folks waiting in line because, people talk waiting in line to vote.
Mm-hmm.
And there are things they can and can't talk about. But they can absolutely talk about social organizations that have nothing to do with partisan politics. That's allowed. Mm-hmm. So she was talking about how she's a Rotarian and her club requires her to vote. And if she doesn't vote, she gets fined.
Wow.
And I listened to conversations like that and every now and then participated in conversations like that because it was a very interesting way to learn about the realities of civics that you weren't taught even in a day when we did learn civics in school. Because they don't tell you that these vested interest groups of upper middle class and lower upper class do-gooders, as they see themselves, white saviors, as other people might see them, are required by their organizations to vote, and that this probably ends up favoring certain class interests in elections.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I totally understand that. For us, it's, there's 500 Republicans registered, 350 Democrats. I'm going to run as an independent because I know there's a certain core group of Republicans that will not support anybody on a Democratic ticket. So
this is the difference between 2016 Bernie Sanders and 2020 Bernie Sanders. Is that in 2016, everybody still gave Bernie Sanders credit for the I after his name.
Yep.
And he made a big show of fighting it out till the end against Hillary Clinton in the primary.
Right.
2020 Bernie Sanders had already endorsed Hillary Clinton and proven he was a good Democrat.
That's right.
And if you look at the primaries, a lot fewer of a certain kind of independent voter
was willing to
who
come
would
out.
never vote for a Democrat was participating in Democratic primaries in states where they were allowed to do so. And that made a big difference in states like West Virginia, for instance, where people hate Democrats for a variety of reasons, mostly because they feel betrayed.
Well, that's the problem. And the Democratic Party in my town is very weak.
Yeah.
It doesn't throw up much of a fight ever, if any. I mean, the last three elections.
A lot of that going around the Democratic Party these days.
The last three elections, they've let the town supervisor, the town, all of that, supervisors, town board members, they go on unopposed.
Well,
elections.
And independent journalist Zainab Day has written on this a lot, actually. That one of the biggest weaknesses that the Democratic Party shows in the country that we live in today is not even running candidates in elections that they believe are going to be won by Republicans anyway in order to save resources, which of course abandons those areas to Republicans forever.
Right. That's what it's been doing. And you know what? This isn't going to be an expensive campaign. I mean, I will probably spend pretty accurately, maybe $2,500 total in a 16-month period. My opponent will probably spend zero. He's got name recognition. He has the feeling that he's already there. He has the advantage in the Republican vote. They come out. But in the last off election, 2023, he only got 251 votes. 76 people who were at the ballot didn't vote for him at all, and 3 write-ins. I personally always write my name in when there's always
an activist friend of mine, Alan Max Axelrod, who I have heard is too busy to do much these days, but who I think about and wanted to call out, once was very involved in running people for local office in Southern Illinois. He studied local elections and realized that in towns of 20, 30,000 people, there were maybe 3,000 to 5,000 people who were actually voting. And that to win an election, all you had to do was get the other 10,000 people in town, well, 10,000 of the other 30,000 people in town to show up.
That's right.
And if you could do that, you won.
And in my case,
I can see this in a smaller scale here, 250 votes. You only need to get 500 people who wouldn't otherwise show up to show up.
That's right. That's what I figure. I figure if I can get 600 extra people to show up, I've won. And it's in their best interest, because as we were talking about that Little League part, in this town comprehensive plan, they were supposed to, let me see, hold on one second. I think I got a copy of something. It's over here. No, I'll have to find it. We were supposed to have a town committee that would go over these kind of recreational things. It says it right in the book. It says, goals, immediate, it's short term. They're going to do it. It was going to take a short term amount of time to actually plot, to put it into effect. And that was 2 years ago. So we should have already had a committee. We should have had people's voices being answered. And if the supervisor had been, a little better politician, he could have saved himself a lot of heartache. And if he had made this committee, they could have been the ones who are getting, inundated with 4-hour meetings every week. And he would just say, look, it's that committee, you got to go through there. But he didn't, because he wants to make everything about him.
I have a news update. Co-host Bess Goden had food poisoning today, and that's why she hasn't shown up. And I hope that she feels better as soon as possible.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Sorry to break in there. I just got that bit of news and wanted to share that.
I was wondering, but that's what I'm saying is that, look, that's the kind of control that I'm trying to fight against. We need more transparency. I want people to show up. I mean, it's ridiculous that we live in a 1,600 person town and maybe 20 or 40 or 30 people come to a town hall meeting when there's a big issue. We should have people coming all the time. We shouldn't.
Only 250 people vote. I mean, that's
300,
less than a quarter of the population.
That is. I mean, we need to get these people out. We need to get them in there. Their voice matters. Doesn't matter whether they're second homeowner, first homeowner, 10 generations. Come on out. We got to figure out how to get you out.
Then you could actually have democracy on a community level.
That's right. And that's what we need. I mean, and we need to affect, we need to talk about the big issues, right? Climate change. Yes, I know most of my fellow towns members don't believe in it, but whether you believe in climate change or not, you can't deny the fact that we used to go from having 60 to 70 inches of snow a year down to 20 or 30. And that affects the prices of everything, right? When the ski slope has to pump out more fake snow, their ticket price has to go way up. And that limits the number of people that can come into town. That kills tourism.
Now, as a fun fact, my hometown was less than an hour away. Well, a little more than an hour away from a place called Mount Baldy.
Oh,
which is one of the handful of year-round ski slopes in Southern California.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, the more fake snow they have to pump out, the more it costs.
Mm-hmm.
And when they couldn't and there comes a point where you can't pump out fake snow if it's not cold enough.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, to the best of my knowledge, Mount Baldy isn't year-round anymore, because now they have some years where there's no snow. Thank you, climate change.
Right, and that's exactly what we're facing. You know, I mean, all of the major ski corporations have studied the issue. Vail is investing big time. They're one of the biggest corporations in the world for skiing, and they have the best snow coverage. We've got a rinky-dink little mountain owned by a company, owned by a small, well, it's not small, it's a pretty big, it's a $2 billion hospitality hedge fund. But we're talking,
that's never a good sign.
No, it's not. We're talking about $2 billion versus something like $20 or $30 billion, and ski slopes from.
It's even beyond that. When it comes down to the hedge fund is the kind of owner who is more likely to rip the assets apart and sell them at a profit for it to cover its members' losses when inevitably necessary, than to actually put real money into that asset and strengthen it.
Well, they strengthened it now.
Okay.
They put money into it now. They put a $70 million. It's a good chunk of change. That's
I don't want to say good, because capitalism bad, but I mean that's better than one expects to hear from hedge funds these days in this modern era of corporate looting.
Well, let me get to the fun facts about it, right? Yeah, they put $70 million in. They hired all outside contractors.
Of course.
Right. So that money never stuck around here. That went somewhere else. I don't know which the contractors.
At very best, it went into the closest it ever came to being local was when it went into the pockets of the McDonald's folks around town.
We Subway. We only have a Subway, no McDonald's.
That's
we're not big enough for that.
I'd rather have if you only have one place, I'd rather it be Subway than McDonald's. I'm not a big fan of either as a corporation, but I would rather have Subway's food. I wish they still had $5 footlongs. Getting rid of $5 footlongs was a crime against the working class.
Well, they might have to bring it back. The food industry, the fast food industry, has been taking a killing in the last 24 months.
Well, I mean, the fact that Subway and McDonald's and KFC are all on the BDS list hasn't helped them.
No, but even before that, it's just the prices.
They've all been doing worse, yes.
They just have increasing the prices. I mean, McDonald's has been complaining that more people are eating at home. God damn them.
Stop increasing the prices and that's the whole thing is the biggest reason we eat out less is because my wife is always complaining how expensive it is.
It is.
And we would rather do takeout because, we don't have to go in places and sit down and take risks and risk other people.
True. But as I was saying, so all that money, they did put a lot of money in. But the reason why they did it is because they thought they were going to build a private club.
Of course they did. And here's Bess letting us know that she's...
I would say something in the chat to her, but I'm using Mozilla instead of my Chrome, and I don't have it hooked up to the internet. And I'm also going to answer the question about the anarcho-syndicalism, because I actually am that. So I do believe in that, and that's what I'm running on. And that's the only reason why my statement even got into the newspaper, because our local journalist thought it was too funny not to put it in there. And I got to talk about that in a minute. So that's great, right? I mean, a private club, right? And they want to put spas up there and a hotel and everything else. So we're looking at the monopolization of it, right? They're going to control that whole region, and all the houses are going to be theirs. And the fee they were asking was $175,000 to get in.
They want to create their own little wealthy community to make Windham obsolete.
Well, sure. I mean, that's always been the dream.
Do you remember did you ever watch Weeds? So in the second season of Weeds, the church gated community moves in as a startup town next door to Eclectic. And rapidly takes over and incorporates and absorbs Eclectic into its new pop-up community, just like that.
Yeah.
And it's all rich Christians.
Well, yeah, that's definitely
that's what I'm imagining happening to Windham now that you've described this.
That was definitely the goal. The problem was they overestimated the number of people that actually wanted to buy. They only got 170 people to buy in. B, they also underestimated the rage it would cause with all the skiers that were renters here.
Oh, I bet.
So they just left the community. I mean, we have seen a strong downturn in summer. I mean, the town is crowded, but not like it was. I mean, we get 8,000 people in this little town on a weekend in the winter, 8 to 10, when that mountain's churning and the conditions are right. And they're gone. You know, they went to Bel Air, which is a state-run mountain, which the price is like $25 or $30 a ticket. Ours is $270.
A state-run mountain.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got socialist skiing in New York.
Well,
state socialist skiing anyway.
We have a state-run mountain. I mean, I don't call that socialism. I call that state capitalism. But
that's fair. That's fair.
I mean, it's not like the workers there are like raising their hand, go, well, you know, I'd really like a raise today.
That's sadly true, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they want to get them off the payroll and outsource as much as they can in New York, just like we did with the Easy Pass system, which is another obnoxious.
Yeah, I remember when they started using Easy Pass in Southern California for for 2 lanes on the 91 freeway, the Pomona Corona Expressway. They call those 2 lanes now. It used to be the Pomona Corona Freeway. That was the whole thing. But the Easy Pass lanes you had were they took out what had been the diamond lane, the carpool lane, and the next lane over to it, and made them both Easy Pass lanes. So to use those lanes, you had to not just be willing to pay the toll, but had to have the obnoxious little code gizmo in your car to use to not trigger someone to eventually come pull you over.
Yep. The transponder, which we could not. But
they
I
were
mean,
actually introducing that in California when I moved away in 2001, 2002. That was still a really new thing, and we were like, "How is this going to work? Is it going to catch on?"
Wow! So
apparently, it caught on with the turnpike business.
Well, think about it. Think of how much it saves the state. I mean, they don't have to deal with a union. They don't have to deal with sick days anymore, they claim. They don't have to deal with any of this stuff. They put this little transponder in your car. And the best part is, for the company, you don't really know if it's working right half the time. So, you know, it takes you like 2 years to figure out that, oh, wow, for a whole month in July, it charged me 4 times what I should have been charged. And you make your complaint, they say, no, sir, it didn't. And then, then they find out that like 20,000 people have that problem. And you see it all over. It's ridiculous.
It's almost like they build a certain baseline of theft in, and knowing once they know that people won't complain beyond a certain point.
Sure. They call it errors.
I remember from having worked around utilities in various ways. A company I work for now means I do technical support for electrical submeters. I used to do technical support for cellular phones. I used to do customer service for CenturyLink.
Wow.
So I've been around utilities and utility billing either directly or adjacently before. Utilities have what's called a tariff. And if you look at it on your bill, it looks like a very official list of like fees and taxes set by the state.
It's not.
But it's not. No, what it actually is a list of extra charges that the utility has said they're going to charge all their customers this year. And the state has then stamped it and said, this is okay. And as long as they're following that tariff and all their other billing rules, they're in compliance with the proper regulations, and they're only stealing from their customers within the appropriate amount.
Well, yeah, and we've gotten used to that.
Yes, we have.
But Easy Pass is always in the error phase.
Yeah,
it's always oops, sorry, 12,000 customers got charged too much on the Staten Island Bridge. They all got charged being overweight tractor trailers instead of passenger cars. We'll refund that. And you got to fight like 2.5 years to get your refund because you need to have a class action lawsuit before they even admit it.
And the management of Easy Pass does not help with the popularity of congestion pricing with the working class of the outer boroughs of New York City. I will tell you.
No, and that was such a terrible scheme they came up with.
Well, they wanted to pay the MTA's debt without actually having to audit the MTA's budget.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is the thing that people don't understand. The MTA is like the best funded public transportation in the country. It's a state agency. But because it's a state agency, and because of the way the ruling class clique in Albany has been running the state of New York since Uncle Mario was governor, arguably longer, but Uncle Mario is the one who set the model that Andrew pathetically attempted to follow and failed. I mean, how sad when you can't even be as good a corrupt machine boss as your dad.
Guess it just didn't fall that far from the tree. That apple, it kind of got stuck somewhere.
It fell into a basket a little too high up.
That's right, just a little out of his reach. I mean, the whole scheme was just never going to work well.
Well, but I mean, the whole thing,
and it wasn't designed to.
But the whole reason for the scheme was because that somehow the best funded public transportation system in the country is in debt despite its great funding because nobody knows where the money went. That's and nobody wants to audit the agency to find out where the money went because, corruption.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right about all that stuff. So it was never designed really to function. But even if it was designed to work the way they said it was never going to work. I mean, you were putting the cart before the horse, right?
It was all supposed to be this ridiculous scheme to pay the MTA's debt without having to budget any more money to pay the MTA's debt. Which is ridiculous on the face of it because if the MTA's budget was being properly managed, the MTA wouldn't have that debt because it's really well funded and shouldn't be that expensive.
No. But what I was getting at is that let's just say you bizarrely wanted to do it their way, right? By putting in $507 million to some company to put transponders all over is the wrong way. You put the
I totally agree.
You put the $507 million back into the MTA to fix the trains so that everyone can go first. Because once you get those 190,000 extra users, what do you do with them, right? If you don't have the rolling stock to move them, they're not going to get on the train and be happy, are they?
First, you declare an emergency, defund all state law enforcement agencies in order to bail out the MTA.
Well, that's not
bad. Then you audit the MTA to make sure that the bailout money is being properly spent and that the system is being put back on a functional basis. And then just for fun, you audit the auditors to make sure that there's no corruption there.
Well, yeah, you got to do that. I mean, but but you still have to fix the fundamental problem is that once you start putting more people on the trains, you need to have the rolling stock and the people to do it.
Well, and then that's the whole thing. You need to make sure that you're hiring enough people with enough pay and enough benefits and enough time off.
Right.
And that you are properly maintaining your rolling stock and buying new rolling stock where appropriate.
True.
But at the same time, not buying new rolling stock from Papa Joe's cousin, Uncle Mike, who happened to get rolling stock that fell off a truck and is somehow giving you a special low price that's actually 3 times what it would cost on the market.
Sure, there's all those kind of things you have to look into. But what I was just getting at is that just the fundamental function is that this plan was designed to both clear the debt, but yet somehow also alienate people from the mass transit, because as soon as didn't have enough people, didn't have enough trains, as soon as you got enough of the people that couldn't afford the extra $1,700 a year,
as soon as you had them on the trains, now
on the train,
you haven't solved the rolling stock problem. You haven't solved the delay problem, the over policing problem.
All those go way, way up. Now everyone is, a criminal because the cops.
It's almost like the over policing problem is designed to prevent the train from having enough people on it to bring out the rolling stock problem in clear fashion.
That might be, get those troublemakers out of the station.
Well, it's like, when you talk about things like what we're considering now, obviously it was successfully beaten, which is good, though there's worries that someone might try again. But they were talking about an MTA mask ban.
Yeah. Yes.
So, I mean, number one, what the MTA mask ban has the effect of driving everybody who feels in any way vulnerable off of public transportation and into various schemes where they end up somehow paying congestion pricing, either directly or indirectly. While at the same time, you're using congestion pricing to pay off the MTA's debt without actually paying for any of the things that got the MTA into debt in the first place and never actually got done, like the proper maintenance and replacement or refurbishment of rolling stock.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. All of those things are a huge problem. Luckily, they're New York's. Not mine.
Well, but that's the fun. They're the state of New York's.
It is. Well,
which means it's yours too.
Well, it does, but I mean, it's one that I can't fix, even if I get elected.
That's true. That's true. I was thinking more as a citizen and taxpayer.
As a citizen, as a citizen and independent journalist, I'll be certain to continue to blog about how I think that those are terrible plans, and that we have to spend the money first, create the jobs that will actually pay for our creating
jobs means actually creating jobs, not bringing people in from out of town to drive out people who already live there and pay higher rents.
That's right. That's true. I mean, that's our one problem though here. When we don't have people, so we got to have that space where we need to bring you in and keep you here.
Yes, and this is true. But it's good that people are leaving New York and they're only keeping their population up because of immigration.
Not if you talk to anyone from New York City who's a GOP, that's the that I mean, I don't know how many conversations I've had with people locally that are just terribly racist towards all refugees, and it's of course it's a terrible situation. I mean, because on this one hand, they talk about how they want these proper immigrants, the ones that do it the right way. Well, how much more right can you be than a political refugee?
Well, but that's the thing. When they say people who do it the right way, what they forget to tell you is that the system by which we choose which countries to admit people from is racist in the first place.
Sure. Always has been.
So the whole asylum issue hinges on the question of legal or illegal border crossings. Now, there is no requirement for legally crossing the border to request asylum.
No, there isn't.
Requesting asylum is legal whether you legally cross the border or not. And if an asylum claim is granted, an illegal border crossing is
legal.
Is a legal border crossing.
That's right.
Which means even by the horrible language used by the bigots, nobody is actually an illegal alien until after their asylum hearing.
That's right. Just don't tell that to Fox News.
But this is important.
I know it's important. I know.
To understand, because the waves of illegal immigration that our government and our reactionaries in the media like to blame on Mexico tends to originate places south of Mexico in response to political or economic repression by parties funded by the United States. Sure.
I mean, we all know the big issue is that we're upset that Mexico doesn't have the ability to stop them at their border.
That's really the whole thing. As somebody asked me once, because they're trying to, if you're ever asked in good faith, now no one would ever ask this question in good faith, because people who explored it in good faith would probably already know the answer. But the question is, okay, so what other country in the world has as many undocumented immigrants cross its southern border every day as the United States? And the answer is Mexico. That's because most of the undocumented immigrants on that southern U.S. border are immigrants who already crossed the Mexican border. Now, the agreement that the Trump administration made with AMLO was that Mexico would keep those people, and I'm sure Trump used exactly those words too, that Mexico would keep those people in Mexico and not let them into the United States. We weren't even asking Mexico to police their own border. We were asking Mexico to take more refugees so we would not have to. Now, AMLO was willing to do this up to a certain point because he believed that some people were probably better off in Mexico where they were reasonably welcome than in the United States where they were unwelcome. But he also understood that there's a danger in this because, number one, now you're policing this immigrant population in a way that increases the risk of Mexican cops doing violent things to immigrants from Point South, which isn't what you want if you're trying to be more humane. And because he also wanted to pressure the United States to change certain behaviors in return for him keeping people in Mexico.
Well, I mean, there's a whole lot of issues with the way in which we wanted to manipulate Mexican policy to benefit ourselves. And he had a hell of a time with the corruption in his own police force, which then saw this as a great way to use some of those southern borders as drug mules. And that should be stopped. And the best way to stop this is to just open up our border, I think, and just let these people in. You know, let's see who the real ones are.
There was a time when the border was essentially open.
Oh, yeah.
The reason that the army had to chase Pancho Villa into Mexico was because there was nothing stopping Pancho Villa from crossing into the U.S. to rob a bank on the U.S. side of the border.
If he really did that.
Well, he definitely really did that. That's pretty well documented. Now, the point is, was he justified in doing it? And the answer to that is, of course he was. But that's a whole other conversation, and capitalists don't want to have it.
No, I mean, but I'm just saying that most of the border raids that they claimed on Pancho Villa were
So they did rob. There were several instances, and this is why the army chased him. There were several incidences where people loyal to Pancho Villa robbed banks on the U.S. side of the Mexican border as part of their funding.
I know.
Of their fighting against the president of Mexico and his thug Orozco, who had previously been Pancho Villa's sidekick. With the complicated politics of the Mexican Revolution.
Well, I know, but what I'm just saying is that, but we blamed a whole lot of other raids.
Oh, we absolutely did. Because we wanted to. We blamed. We blamed what the Texas Rangers were doing to Tejano families on the Texas side of the U.S.-Mexican border on Pancho Villa because we wanted to cover for the white racists.
Right, and that's what I was talking about, those raids. And they did it in Utah, they did it in Arizona, New Mexico, all across there. And it was all magically Pancho Villa's doing. I mean, the guy only had maybe 1,000 people, and apparently it was across like 2,000 more. But
and that was the tail end of Pancho Villa's career after Orozco had won the big battles.
Yep.
Pancho Villa's the successful portion of Pancho Villa's career was actually when he helped put the president who ultimately killed him in power.
So that's one problem we have. We have we have to deal with that, a little bit of racism that's jumping into, well, not a little, quite a lot. I mean, because we are seeing immigrant populations growing here, and that's something that the town does not like too much. Even though, we like the fact that the guy who makes the pizzas in town is from south of the border.
Well, so that's the whole thing is that, and I swear, people don't always seem to understand that the two things go together. It's like you see people say, this new Mexican place opened up here, and it's really good, and you've got to go there. The food's the best. But then you also hear the same people complaining a week later. I was standing in line at Walmart, and this guy only spoke Spanish and needed somebody to speak Spanish to him. It pissed me off so much that I had to listen to people speak Spanish in my country. It's like, dude, who do you think owns the Mexican restaurant you were talking about last week?
That's right. And so we got that problem. We got to address that before it becomes a serious issue. And so we got to get that cleared up. We have to get, people involved, all types, immigrants. We got to, if there are people that are undocumented, we got to figure out how to protect them from the INS, because they actually are providing. I mean, they're working at all the companies that they're really. We can't lose them.
At the company, one of the restaurants I'm talking about in Tennessee, one of the owners worked as a janitor at the same cellular phone repair plant where I worked as a RF testing and quality control tech.
Oh.
So the reason she worked as a janitor, despite being one of the owners of the restaurant, was because she got health care from working as a janitor.
Sure.
And because she didn't personally work at the restaurant. So you think about this and you talk about people working multiple jobs, and part of that is small business owners working a day job for benefits while running their small business.
Sure. It's hard. I've run a small business. It's hard to get health care. It's almost impossible.
And at the same time, that deprives them of their social mobility by keeping them rooted in the working class that they're trying to escape.
Yeah.
And if social mobility isn't actually possible, then maybe the working class should reconsider class warfare, because that's what's happening and we're losing.
Sure. That's absolutely true. And I've got some ideas on that. I mean, I like
I know.
cooperative models. I mean, healthcare. We got this region, right? We have no hospital within 45 minutes.
Yep.
We have a very old population. We're
Yep.
trending towards older. We need a cooperative hospital. That's
Yeah.
what I mean. It's I know the AMA will have a fit again, but in the 1930s, Texas, of all places, was the cooperative hospital hotbed in America. And we can do it again. We can make a small, really good hospital right here, service everyone within what we call the mountaintop, which is about 7 towns. And we should have all the towns can work together. We can fund it, employ our own doctors, employ our own things, work a healthcare scheme with it so that all those small local employers can get healthcare for their employees, can be part of it. And that will really increase the benefit packages we have for the town population. You know, if you're a small employer, and let's say you're only paying $2,000 a year, right, to be part of the cooperative, most small employers can afford that if they have got like 3 or 4 employees. You know, it's when it's $4,000 an employee a year or $30,000 an employee. You know, you just can't do that if you're a small time operator. It's just not possible.
Plus, when you're in that situation to create cooperative healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
you can have a setup that is then managed and run by healthcare professionals as opposed to accountants.
Right. Yeah.
And that's really the goal, is something where you're focused on something other than the quarterly losses and gains.
Mm-hmm. And there's tons of money out there we can use to finance it. I mean, we have it here, our employees. We just have not been very good as a town board. I've been going through all the money. We leave so much money out there that we just, I don't know, we just don't seem to have any will to go write a couple of grants.
Somebody's probably making a dime off every dollar that's not being spent somewhere.
Well, I don't know if there's any real corruption. I don't think that. I think it's more,
there's
status
always
quo.
So the first rule,
I know there's always corruption.
The first rule of any organization, or even any hierarchy, or even any authority, is there's always corruption. Even in the best hierarchies, there's always corruption. Even in an organization that ultimately did a lot of material good for a lot of people, like the Bolsheviks, there's still enough corruption to be able to say, but maybe this wasn't good. And people like Emma Goldman pointed some of that out.
I just don't know, so I'm not going to say there is any.
And you're running for office, so you have to be a little careful about what you say without.
What I do know is this:
without knowledge,
it's not a viable plan any longer for us to sit here and not take advantage of these grants from the state.
What I will say is the attitude that you are facing,
mm-hmm.
the how dare you question me
mm-hmm.
attitude in response to any sort of inquiry or examination of public policy.
Yes.
That in itself suggests something to hide if the question is answered honestly. If not that question specifically, they're worried about getting too comfortable answering honestly and saying the wrong thing later.
Maybe. I mean, they definitely don't want to answer it, but that's a tip.
I have to admit that I might be a cynic in the sense of actually taking a candle to look for an honest man, original sense of the word, just a little bit maybe.
Well, here's what is happening. This town does not like to answer questions. Never has.
Sure. Well, small towns, the people who control small towns almost never do.
No. And I don't know if it's corruption completely, but it's just that they don't feel they have to.
Well, that itself is a corrupt
It
attitude.
is. It leads to corruption.
I am entitled to my position, therefore I should not be questioned in my official acts.
Right. I mean, I don't know if it's the corruption is that they don't want to be part of a democratic system any longer. They want you to vote for them, let them sit up at the board, come twice a month, and do their little thing. If it takes 15 minutes or 30 minutes, have zero questions. I mean,
and this is my problem. I know I'm cutting to national politics.
Sure.
This is my problem with Joe Biden or Kamala Harris saying that they're fighting fascism. Because when it happens on a national scale in Hungary with Viktor Orban, we point to it and we say that's fascist.
Poland.
It happens on a local scale in our hometowns, and it's our local gentry doing it. We don't say that's fascist.
No.
We say law and order.
Well, I think we like to phrase it here as, that's just the character that makes up Windham politics.
That's a nice euphemism.
It is. And it's part of the reason why I was so puzzled, right? When my statement, which I put on Facebook of all places, but I knew it would work. I was 95% sure. Let's just put it that way. That I said if I made a statement that was bold enough, and I put in enough locations on Facebook where I know a large percentage of the town is viewing, that it would get back to our local reporter, a guy by the name of Mike Ryan, who runs the Windham Weekly. He's the editor, and I knew he would present the story, right? Because not much is going on right now. Here's the thing. He cuts and pastes my article, which you can find on the Leon Trotsky Revolutionary Newsletter and Podcast Substack. He cuts and pastes it all, I think it's like 1,500 words or 2,000 words he puts there. And there's only 4 paragraphs that are his in the whole thing. Everything else is me. I mean, he never asked me, like, hey, so what do you mean by a workers' council? What do you mean by an economic development council? What do you mean by being an anarcho-syndicalist? I mean, and
that would require him to do actual labor. Whereas if he just copies and pastes, he can say, I'm doing journalism. This is what he said.
Oh, yeah. And
I'm reporting on it.
It is. It's just not what I call in-depth journalism. And that's kind of what we're facing here, right? I mean, he does this with everybody. He just goes through and he's, if you told him, Mike, I think the sky's going to be chartreuse this afternoon, right around 2:30. And, you look up, it's blue. And he'd just report, so-and-so said sky will be chartreuse at 2:30 p.m. today. Not sure what we should do with that. Right, that would be like the extent of it. He wouldn't well, why do you believe that? Is there something that you're doing to make the sky this unusual color? Are you launching some kind of aerosol? I would ask these questions. Is there an aerosol thing that you're doing? Are you having a laser light show?
I'm not a chemtrail believer, but the sky changing color is a little weird.
Right. I mean, is there something that you're doing to cause this, or is it, I mean, you might want to ask those follow-up questions.
Have we let that rainmaking company from Laguna Beach start doing any business up here? Do we have enough farming to pay for that?
That's right. And but he doesn't. He sits at these meetings. He takes down what they say, and he goes off. And every once in a while, he puts a report in the newspaper.
Stenography journalism.
It is. And, there's a place for pure reportage, right? There's also a place to come back. But when you have 70 people coming to town hall meeting after town hall meeting, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a journalist, you should be asking them questions. Why are you here? What are you coming for? Are you all coming for the same thing? I mean, are the views uniform between all the members? Are there this, that? These are simple questions you think you'd ask. Nope. Doesn't want to ask them.
Well, if you ask a question, you might offend someone and lose your access.
Well, you might, but I mean, how are you going to lose access? We as a town supervisor, if you're a town supervisor, you still need this guy. You can't say no to him, really. I mean, yes, you can put things on Facebook. Yes, you can put things on the internet.
Because this is the person who's releasing all of your decisions to the public.
Right. So you still need to have him give you interviews. You still need to have that. And you know what? I mean, I think personally, if I were there, if I were the supervisor, and I hope to be one, I kind of like a little more adversarial, right? You know, I want you to ask me some hard questions, like, oh, because maybe I haven't thought the plan all the way through, and maybe we need other people to come out and say, hey, you know, you haven't thought that one all the way through. Let's do this, and this could also happen. But that's not going to happen with this kind of reporting.
Yeah, no. Well, that's the whole thing. Is that authority should be scrutinized by the press. That's the whole point of the press.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he's too comfortable. He sits up with them off to the side. I mean, he should be in the pit with everybody else.
Now, I'm going to make some logical statements. Okay. Now, obviously, there are points to which I believe you can't justify the kind of authority we're talking about. Okay. And that too much of it is ultimately anti-democratic, and I haven't given up that belief. Sure. But I still want to ask the question from a perspective that pretends to admit that authority might be justified at some point.
Okay.
So the first thing is, if we're going to have a system where some sort of hierarchy is going to exert authority, then we need to have some sort of system to review the actions of authority to make sure that the actions are justified and correct. Mm-hmm. And in theory, that should be filled by a free and democratic press.
Well, that's definitely one arm of it, the press. The other application, I think, is
citizens directly asking questions based on their interactions with the press asking questions based on their interaction with the citizens, which is what I mean by a democratic press. True. Not one that just interacts with power, but that also interacts with people.
Right. And I would take that a step further, that you really need to have actual citizens in the government able to put pressure on them. So you have to have you have to have committees, you know, where the citizens are formed and they come back, they study the problem, and they say, hey, we found this to be the case.
But then the question becomes, how do you get people enough leisure time to be able to serve on these committees?
True. That is always the problem. Personally, I think we can go to a 4-day work week, 8 hours a day in this town, in most operations.
See, now this is good thinking. This is the kind of thinking we need if we actually want to be able to democratize local government. We need to have local regulation around the work week.
We do. I mean, we do it to some extent, like the municipal aspect, right? The road crew, they're getting a 40-hour work week for 10-hour days. I don't think they really need 10 hours. I've looked at what they're doing. We could probably extend that. We could lower those hours, increase the number of workers we have. We have 6 on full time, but in the summer we could go to 4 or 5 part-time guys, preferably people that would want to work only 4 hours a week, right? I mean, that maybe people like to mow. People like to mow. I don't know why. I don't like to mow. It's a boring job. But you know, my father loved to mow. My grandfather loved to mow. We get some of these old guys.
There are people, yeah.
On tractors.
There's a whole culture around riding lawnmowers.
Yeah.
They had Dolph Lundgren in that horrible commercial. It's not how fast you mow, it's how well you mow fast.
That's right. I mean, and we've got the parks, right? Let's get those people, right? Let's find them. They need a little extra money. They can mow 2 days a week, 8 hours at $20 an hour. We're looking at what, $160 before taxes? It's not that big of a deal.
Well, so here's where you want to be careful. You don't want to be so public budget friendly that you're actually shortchanging workers. If there are people who are doing full-time work,
oh no,
you want people who are doing 4 10-hour days. If they're going to be doing 4 6-hour days instead, they should still be making the same money.
Oh no, I'm not doing that. I'm not cutting the salary.
Okay, I was, because when you said when you talked about part-time and
those are the part-time people, right?
Yeah.
And all they would do was just mow the parks, right? We got 3 parks to mow. We need 2 guys. We need 2 or 3 guys to do it. They could do it all week long. Boom, mow those parks. That was what you do. The other guys who are working 8 hours a day at the full-time pay will be doing the heavy lifting projects that we have too much of.
Sure.
That we're not getting to. We have 4.5 miles of roadway that needs to be refurbished.
Yeah.
We don't have enough money to cover all of that. We can basically cover 1.2 miles, and it's in all of our. That's like one thing that they actually put in the minutes of the meetings. I mean, the minute
isn't pitching in to make your roads better.
Oh, I don't think we're seeing any of that sweet Easy Pass money yet.
I just thought I'd throw that out there since I know it's been favored by the state.
Not unless we get our section of Route 23 to be a toll road.
See, because I mean, originally in theory, the idea of state toll roads was to pay for state highway maintenance.
That was it. That was, in fact, I mean, you go back historically speaking, that the few corporations that you could historically make before the great corporation boom of the 1870s were canals, turnpikes, and like the post office.
And railroads.
Railroads. But I mean,
and shipping companies.
That was it. So we don't have a canal. We got plenty of roads. We don't have a toll on it. We use our town taxes, but we're not paying for it. We're not doing it. Where's this money going? Is what I want to know.
That's a very good question. And this is where I always raise the question of corruption, because I understand that you don't know, you can't say. I totally get that. The reason I bring it up is because there are certain. I'm going to go ahead and apply the mistake of common sense, and I'm going to say that in this case, common sense is almost as good as logic, and the logic supports the common sense, at least as far as probabilities and risk assessment goes, which is to say, it is a truism that power corrupts. It is a fact that we have documented proof of corruption and power at a scale in our modern era that has perhaps not been seen since the original Gilded Age in the late Victorian, early Edwardian centuries.
Sure.
And it is worth noting that any place a small group of people possess and maintain power, they're probably benefiting from it in some way personally.
Well, I mean, that goes without saying that the possibility for malfeasance here is definitely a high probability, given the nature that we've allowed ourselves to become. We've let people go unopposed. We don't question. We don't show up at town hall meetings. We don't have a press that digs in deep and asks, well, why does X cost what? Y? Why aren't you able to spend $4.5 million on 4.5 miles of road? Why? And you're right. I mean, all I know is at this point, I can tell you that that's what the case is. I can't say exactly why that's the case. I'm
because
hoping
nobody's asking those questions, number one. And when you try to ask some of them, people act like you're some sort of evil outside agent provocateur. Fair point.
Sure. But I am getting to the bottom of it. I've foiled for all the budgets for the last 10 years. That's what we call our Freedom of Information Law.
Yes.
Instead of Freedom of Information Act, we have the FOIL in New York. Which sounds really funny when you say it sometimes, because you're like, no, it sounds like I'm going out to fence somebody.
Well, there's also another way you could look at it, which is in the comedy sense, in which case, the government's FOIL Act.
That's right. It's the comedy where the thing to play off of.
Foiled again.
Or the literary sense, he's the foil character for this person's corruption.
Yes.
But I don't know. I mean, so I can't say with any determination. I mean, I would like to think that that's not the case, but I think that what the case is just complacency. You know, we become so complacent at doing things this way. We don't want to look at other ways. We don't want to accept other paths. We certainly don't want to do anything that maybe doesn't make the locals look like they're the best option. So we're stuck in this pattern of, decisions that aren't the best for us and aren't succeeding. It's like, we know the town needs more jobs. We know that, right? And we throw our hands up and say, oh, well, but we're in the watershed for New York City, so we can't have industry. We certainly can. Yeah, we're not going to build a Ford plant here, but no one said we wanted a Ford plant. We've got acres and acres of open land that we can use to create, we could make sunflower seeds. I just looked this up. Sunflower oil is selling for $905 per ton on the commodity market. You get 40 gallons an acre, somewhere between 20 and 80 gallons. So say we get 40 gallons an acre. We got 1,000 acres. That's 4,000.
I've got a radical notion for you.
Yeah.
I remember reading this in a book somewhere. I think it was called The Conquest of Bread.
Uh-oh.
Since we're talking about, empty land that could be used for agricultural purposes, you could feed the town.
Well, that is my plan. I see us as being more self-sufficient. Yes, everyone should have a copy of Peter Kropotkin's Conquest of Bread and Mutual Aid, two classics.
But I think that the idea that we can feed population centers locally, both on the smallest and the largest scale, is correct.
It is. But we're not only, and we do have those farms. We should. I want to create everyone's always whining that we don't have a grocery store. Well, we can't get a grocery store like a Hannaford. We got one in Tannersville, and they've got about, 1,800 people. They got one in Prattsville, which is another little town further. Let's see, that's west of us. And that's another, 1,400 people, and they collect from some other little towns. So we got about 5,000 people, but you can't afford more than 2 grocery stores with 5,000 people.
The fact of the history of American development is that the single grocery store in many American towns was completely dependent on extending credit to farmers and having credit extended to it from the bank, and that this system was only sustainable when the bank was willing to trust the grocery store owner, and as a result, the grocery store owner was free to trust the farmer.
Right.
If the bank was not generous enough to the grocery store owner would oppress the farmer, who would in turn not produce enough food to feed the workers.
Right. Well, but here's what I was getting at. Right. We can't afford, right? Our population on a regular basis does not.
Well, and that's the point I'm making. Historically, most communities could not afford that local grocery. It was sustained on credit.
True.
This idea that a bank should just sustain a local business on credit forever because the community needs that business to survive, that idea is gone.
Well, I want to bring that back.
That whole "it's a wonderful life" view of banking is gone.
I want to bring some of that back. I think community banking is a big part of this. And part of the way we're going to make it work is by not only just having a community bank, which unfortunately, due to some arcane rules that I found out in New York State, it cannot, the actual town cannot invest any money. It says this, like I can invest.
You're saying that New York State is against socializing the finance market?
Yes, credit unions are not allowed.
Who would have thought it?
I thought maybe banking they wouldn't be so bad about, but yes, no banking. I can't use a credit union. I can create a development corporation in a town.
Yes.
As a nonprofit, I can create any type of corporate bank I want, but if it's a credit union, that's a no-go. So we'll just create a local regular bank. I don't like them as much, but why not? Put our money in that, make that money start working here in the town instead of being sent off to, JP Morgan's, next bachelor pad in wherever the hell he wants to go. So we got that. But what I was getting at about cooperatives, we have to interlink them, right? And that's how we're going to grow because, yes, you're right. Credit is not going to be extended as easily. So we're going to have our credit fixed with our own bank. We're going to have a corporation that, cooperative that can make something that we can sell in the store. Our food supply here, everything right here. We're big on farm to table.
Ultimately, you're talking about a local revolt against capitalism.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's it. That's it. I mean, and I can see it expanding out through the region, and that's how we're going to defeat it.
Hey, that's a great that's a plan. A plan is more than most people have these days, and it's a place to start. And you're acting on it. I don't know what's going to happen with electoral politics in upstate New York, but it's a plan that's worth exploring. At the very least, it's a chance to build consciousness and awareness.
Well, I hope we can do more than that. I hope we can actually start building some real things. I mean, it's not enough to just write in a 200-page comprehensive manual and say, oh, well, we need jobs. We should have a committee that talks about, how our social resources are allocated, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to sit up here, two of us behind our computer, the other two, maybe they'll say something, maybe they won't. Let the town supervisor have the whole floor.
What's the Windham law enforcement situation?
Oh, that's intriguing. So our biggest crime, well, now that they've taken drugs away, because marijuana is now legal for recreation, it's dropped dramatically, that one. Our biggest crimes.
I live in a state that had the same experience since you mentioned it.
Are theft.
Yeah.
That's it. So in our town hall, there used to be the senior citizen group had a room in the basement, right? That's where they'd meet. They called it the Golden Ages. They recently got moved over to a $1.8 million construction that the town supervisor is very happy with. That is the ambulance service and senior center. So now we've taken what used to be the old senior center and we've upgraded our police department. We now have a detention cell. We never had one before. We don't need one. I mean, we don't have any. I mean, most of these are non-violent crimes. You could just put the guy in a pair of handcuffs.
How many prisoners is a town of 1,611 people detaining overnight on a given evening?
None. Well, it hasn't been finished yet, but I mean, you could literally just put the guy in a sturdy armchair and with a handcuff to it, and he'd be there if you left him there overnight, he'd still be there in the morning, uncomfortable, but there.
That would be kind of brutality, though.
I know, but I'm just saying that. I mean, the idea that we need
don't give them ideas. That's the sort of thing cops do.
But I'm just saying it's like so ridiculous. I mean, we should just have an ankle monitor on him where we can just like GPS track him, like put him back in his house.
Nobody ever wants to use technology to make cops redundant. Have you noticed that?
No. So we got that problem. So we're building this, and it's partly because our new town police chief pretty much demands it.
Gotta love that when the town of 1,611 people and almost no crime has a politically significant police chief.
Oh, they're all politically significant.
Oh, of course. I mean, it's a politically significant job.
Right. So so we don't even have full-time police. That's the joke.
Yeah. Which, that's actually something.
It is.
There are towns that small that have ridiculously large police forces. I think I talked about one of them in Georgia a couple of years back now.
Right.
But no, Texas. I'm sorry. It was in Texas. This town of less than 1,000 people that if you included all of the remote employees working in Houston doing investigations that were really just internet work where people were working from home, the police force had more employees than the town's population.
Wasn't that a town that also had a large correctional facility put in it recently?
I'd have to look that up again. They did have, I believe that there was one nearby.
It's always that. That's like the first thing, right? I mean, our county has spent $90 million on a sheriff's department / county jail.
Yeah. One of the congressional candidates I supported in 2020, Hector Oseguera, was very active in 21 and 2022, protesting his county's contracted ICE facilities because the county was getting in on the money.
Oh, sure.
Contracting out jails to ICE.
Well, that was literally the reason why we had to have one.
Yeah.
So they were sending the profits, as I mentioned to one person, over to Columbia County, right?
Yeah.
And God forbid we should let those inmates / profit margins transfer over there.
Plus, this breeds corruption. There was a case in Pennsylvania where 2 federal judges are still likely to die in prison.
Well,
one of them did die in prison.
Well, wasn't that all? That was a big case. They had
Cash for Kids. That was the company, Core Civic, who still exist and haven't gotten the corporate death penalty for some reason. Well, the judges are going to die in federal prison, but the corporation is doing fine.
Well,
but they were running all of the state juvenile facilities in Pennsylvania at the time, and they were literally paying judges bounties on the side for the kids that judges were sending them for them to be able to fill their contractual obligations to the state of maintaining a certain minimum population per facility to keep them all open.
Right. I have a lot of experience with the New York State correctional facilities. Our small business used to clean all their exhaust systems in their kitchens, and they are some of the I did about 6 of them at one point, and they are just, the people are bizarre. I mean, they talk about, beating up kids, like that's like their fantasies. Like, see that little punk here? He's going to say the wrong word to me one day and I'm going to beat him. I'm like, he's like 12 years old,
Yeah, why would you do that? That's just disgusting.
It is. And so these were the ones that were run by the state. These weren't, and they were upset at the private. They were upset at the private ones because the private ones.
And so most prisons are public. Public prisons are in on all of the get-rich-quick scams that private prisons are in on.
Yep.
This is why counties like Hudson County, New Jersey, contract to do essentially public-private prisons for the federal government.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bad scene, and they were upset because the private prisons were getting the first run, so they got to pick out all the criminals first, and then they were only going to get the overflow. So I was in facilities that had 2 people, 3 people. I mean, that's, why aren't we just closing this down or closing down?
Is there really a reason those 2 or 3 people need to be locked up?
I mean, some of them were very violent. I mean, I did maximum security, and supposedly some of them were guys that like set their parents on fire or something.
So I'm going to say something,
but I really don't know.
That isn't meant to be edgelordy. It's just a fact. Most violent criminals,
I know,
do commit one violent crime and never do anything violent again.
That's true.
Even when released, or even when their one violent crime was a murder. The exceptions are what have created our policy rather than the norms. True.
I mean, the serial killer is a special breed, and they almost never catch them until they're like 20 or 30 into it.
And there are so many myths about serial killers, starting with the fact, number one, that there are a lot fewer than is believed by the public, which is not to say that the number that there are should not be disturbing, or that it doesn't, or that the emergence of this phenomenon during the most predatory stages of capitalism is not worth remarking upon.
Oh, sure.
But at the same time, serial killers are not a social problem on the scale of wage theft.
Oh, no.
Serial killers are not a social problem on the scale of environmental or economic racism.
The truth is that the true serial killers, large corporations that are poisoning, always have a get out of jail free card. I mean, DuPont down in South Carolina and North Carolina, they've polluted every one of their rivers with chemicals that Delaware
has completely destroyed their own watershed, and it's just ridiculously polluted because they're a ridiculously corporate-friendly state.
Well, Delaware is one of the few states where if you're a corporation, you can actually have a representative elected to a town board.
Yes, yes, that's exactly right.
I mean, who does that?
A company town.
That's a company state. That is a city state for a company.
Well, that's the whole thing. Is Delaware allows you to make almost any town a company town. Now that's being a corporate friendly state.
Well, but that's how they became important, right? I mean, in the 1950s and 60s, they changed all their laws so that they could become the corporate headquarters state of America.
Well, the best way to put it is that Biden, in 1973, was smart enough to position himself to be, when the time was right, the senator from Bank Americard.
That's right. Well, but it was even before him. It was started earlier on.
But when I very specifically say Bank Americard, which became Visa.
Yes.
I'm saying that very specifically for a reason. Bank Americard moved its corporate headquarters to Delaware while Joe Biden was in the Senate.
It also gave Joe Biden's son a lovely vice president's position for a while.
Yeah.
And in return, he gave them the 2008 or 2005 bankruptcy law.
Yes, exactly.
which made carpet.
By which time they were Visa and no longer Bank of America, but they were still the same corporate entity.
And that law trapped so many people into long-term debt from their credit cards.
That's also the same law that eliminated your ability to declare bankruptcy for your student loans.
That's right.
And so that also benefited the people who ended up becoming the managers of student debt secured investment products.
Yes. Better than your house.
Well, I guess they figured that people couldn't declare bankruptcy because of their student debt already, so it was a good investment.
Yeah. Well, I guess if you feel that you have debt slaves, you're pretty much locked in. But you have to remember that they still have to pay, and if they can't pay, no matter how locked in they are into that contract, what can you do with them? Send them
well, and ultimately, that's always the risk. That is why the ancient kings of Mesopotamia had jubilees whenever a new king took office. You forgave all the non-commercial debt from the previous reign because periodically forgiving debt and as a result releasing from literal slavery the people who were held in bondage because of that debt was good for the economy. It kept the temple from owning everybody.
It also made you popular.
The king found that when the temple owned everybody, it was very bad for his taxes.
And popularity.
That too. But also, if everybody's a temple debt slave, they're not paying you taxes.
Oh, I know, but I'm just saying.
And the temple is already paying you fewer taxes than the population, if at all, so you're losing.
Not unless you are also... Sometimes you do the opposite. You take over the temple and declare yourself the God King.
Well,
and then
the breakdown of the Roman political system and the Roman economic system and the Roman society that led to the transition from republic to empire was based on the fact that the oligarchs to whom the debts were owed had too much power in the government to want to allow debts to be forgiven anymore.
Yeah.
And the failure of the Roman Republic to seriously legislate to forgive debt is ultimately what led to the breakdown of the Republic and the replacement with the imperial system. Even Julius Caesar was ultimately killed when they thought he might forgive debts.
Yeah. Well, that is true. A little off topic, ancient Rome, but I mean, the oligarchy part isn't.
Ancient Rome is so important to understanding local politics because the ancient Roman Republic, while it administered an empire, was the government of a city
state. Yeah.
Not even, and even in the sense of, you have to understand that it was very much an urban government. The people who were citizens of Rome were based on, the bounds of what was and wasn't Rome were very specific. And you were only allowed into the top families if you were born into them. And the system of class mobility, which was ultimately just enough to keep people happy, broke down as the economic system broke down.
Sure.
Because people were unwilling to forgive the debt necessary to maintain the middle class.
Yeah. It was a debt load problem. But we don't have exactly those kind of problems just yet. We could in the future.
we're getting there. I mean, the reason that
Sure.
student debt forgiveness is such a political issue is because
Oh yeah.
there are large numbers of people who are having money that they should be receiving garnished instead because they owe student debts.
Right. I mean, I'm not saying that that America
and it's just paying their interest. It's not paying their principal.
No, that's true. What I'm talking about is not America. I'm talking about Windham, right? We don't have to. But I mean, you're right. You're right. I mean, overall, that is a problem, right? I mean, that debt issue.
In Windham, it's probably more likely home debt, especially if you're dealing in possibly even reverse mortgages if your population is aging.
That's going to be a concern. We're definitely going to have to look at that in the future. I mean, as the population gets older and the demographics start skewing. I mean, right now we have 33%, according to the census's last checkup in 2022, that make households that make under 50K or under.
Yeah.
And then we have 37% that supposedly make between 50K and 100 on the same chart. Right. So we only have 573 households. So think about that. We have 191 households that are making below 50,000 or below.
Yeah.
And yet somehow we only have 3% poverty.
It doesn't seem to add up. Well, actually, it does, and I can tell you why it adds.
Well, sure, we artificially keep the poverty levels.
This is a federal thing too, which is to say that the U.S. government defines poverty a specific way.
Yeah, sure.
Using a specific formula.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I know.
That specific formula is based on what supposedly the typical household's monthly expenses happen to be. That formula does not include your housing costs.
No, it doesn't.
It assumes food is your biggest expense. So the system by which the federal government formulates poverty keeps people from artificially being declared poor who really are poor because their massive rent is not figured into the equation.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Rent in town, from what I can tell now, doing some anecdotal tests compared to what is stated in the documents, is on average about $1,250. Our income for people at 50,000 or less can't afford $1,250, even with two people in a household.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that. That's over 30% of your income.
Yeah.
So that's something we have to definitely start working on. And the only way to solve that again is better paying jobs.
In Portland, Oregon, well, the suburbs, but still in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, making less than 50 myself, somewhere between 50 and 60 with my wife's disability figured in.
Okay.
We're paying, like 30, 35, 40% of my monthly income on rent.
Yeah.
$15.95 a month here in the suburbs of Portland. And that has to be paid before the 5th of the month, regardless of when my first paycheck that month is, or there's a late fee. So you pay extra if your first check of the month is late.
That's true. No, and you were getting at the same point, is that it's ridiculous to have a metric that doesn't accurately show what's really going on, because if you're making under 50,000 in a community that claims that the median income is 70,000, then you're part of the working poor. I'm sorry. That's what it is.
Well, because let's be honest, the median is one of those great lies, because the average at least is the average of what everybody actually makes, even if some people make much more and some people make much less and nobody really makes the average. The average at least is based on what people actually make. The median is just an arbitrary halfway point.
Yeah, it's not too
arbitrary. If the highest person in town makes $1 billion a year and the lowest and the poorest person in town makes 5,000, then the median is going to be artificially high, and most of the people in town are going to be below the median.
Oh, sure. I mean, that's absolutely true. I mean, it is showing that the median is skewed towards the 12%.
The median is perhaps not the best way to judge income.
No, it's not. But it gives you a figure that this is the middle mark. We got X number above it, X number below it. But here's the interesting thing, and that you brought up is that it only took 12% of our population to range between 100 and 200,000. I mean, 200,000 plus in income to skew that median so far up the ladder that we would no longer consider ourselves.
There are two different markets for everything almost.
Mm-hmm.
A subsidized market and a market rate market.
Mm-hmm.
Housing, utilities in some places, few other things. Housing is the big one, though. There's a subsidized market and there's a market rate market.
Sure.
Access to the subsidized market is restricted in various ways. The subsidized market is not made universally available, and as a result does not provide direct competition for the market rate. The market rate is therefore artificially high as everybody races to the top as far as rent seeking goes, regardless of whether they're really racing to the top in the form of the homes that people are being asked to live in. They're definitely racing to the top for rents.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's another problem. What's pushing up our rents so much is the fact that, so after 2020, by about 2021, people got tired of living the Green Acres lifestyle that were from New York City. They all shifted back to their homes in New York. A lot of them shifted back, but they had these houses up here, and now they wanted to make a profit. So they found out the Airbnb. You could rent for $1,200 a month to a family, or you could rent for $600-700 a night.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what are you going to do? Well, $600-700 a night is much better. One weekend is a whole month's rent.
Yep.
You do 4 weekends, 1 month. You've got 2 months what you would have made in otherwise. Less damage, more people. You can cycle them through. You get more time in your secondary home. And that's the reason why we have 75.7% homes vacant as of now.
Yeah.
And that puts further pressure to push out people.
Yeah, because, empty homes make more money than people who live in the community.
Sure they do.
And nobody wants to factor that in. They want to pretend that housing happens in a vacuum, and that none of the vacant units that are functionally vacant, no one lives there except on weekends and and occasionally a week at a time.
Yeah.
That's more profitable to that property owner than actually providing housing to a person.
Sure. And that's something we have to address.
And then what are they going to do in a situation where they have to be able to pay all their bills? We're forcing them. We're outsourcing the moral hazard onto the market by incentivizing bad behavior by landlords.
Sure. I mean, that's all Airbnb and Vrbo do. I mean, they're profit generating, right? I mean, you don't go to them because you want to make a little profit or have a long-term rental. You go to them because you want to make as much in as short time as you possibly can.
But it's in you see it in the quote unquote rideshare industry that is really just an unlicensed alternative taxi cab.
Yeah. The gig economy is bizarre. I think everyone should read the book Juliet Shore wrote called The Gig Economy.
Yeah.
2012. I mean, you just read, I mean, she interviews a lot of people. I mean, basically, it's just people who don't really want to interact with other people. And, you know, I mean, they're super happy when you show up, you know, do your job at like $2 an hour and then go home and never talk.
Yeah. Well, the people who are managing it all and outsourcing the labor.
Oh, sure.
I find I have very productive conversations about communism in a lift sometimes with the driver.
Well, you do, right? But you're one of the rare ones. I mean, most of the people that really love this system like it because they don't have to interact with people. They don't have to see. They don't have to get, you know, attached to that person. So they don't have to feel like, oh, well, maybe I really am screwing this person over.
Yeah, no, see, and that's the whole thing is that I'd rather talk to people and get to know them.
Well, I mean, but they don't, because then you have to then you realize, well, wait a minute, this guy's only going to make like $4 on this trip after he gets done paying Lyft for paying his half of the Lyft, you know, user fee and the other fee and the gasoline and everything else and the insurance. And you know,
well, that's why my wife yells at me for tipping too much.
Well, I can understand that.
I'm going to make sure they get as much as I can give them in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, and I applaud you for doing that.
But I mean, at the same time, it's also very productive conversations. I have to say.
I'm not saying that you can't have it. I'm just saying that a lot of the users of these services prefer not to.
Sure.
And it's the people who are mostly wealthy. If you really look at the statistics,
I've had an interesting range of conversations with people. Everybody from the guy who, on the one hand, sort of agrees that what anyone would actually call communism, if we tried to invoke it in policy, is the way to go, but who has strong negative connotations about the word communism because his parents came from Castro's Cuba, and that's where he was born and lived until he was 12. And they told him stories that he hasn't deeply questioned. And he compares the sort of, and this is one thing that I've noticed from talking to people who come here from somewhere else. As long as you don't bother anybody else, nobody bothers you here. And that comes from that sense of American individualism. And what people are coming here for, the beneficial side of the most toxic quality we have. And it's interesting when you really think about it that way.
It is. I mean, that's the big problem I'm going to face here, is that I have to try and get people who generally don't want to interact with each other to interact, not just for a little while, but
I mean, that's the first step of organizing a community is creating a community.
We have a community. It's just that we just don't have a strong, I mean, we have a very loose one that doesn't want to, you know, interact routinely with each other.
Then, I mean, is it then a community, or is it a capitalist exploitation center to some degree or another?
I would go with more of an exploitation center, but I'd say any community.
And then we start to. So this is what happens when we really listen to Margaret Thatcher about there being no such thing as society.
Oh yeah, you're just all a clog in the work machine.
And that happens at the local level too.
Sure.
Even some of the good things that I can observe in my community, like the free shuttle that goes between bus stops in the industrial area where I work. That's there because it benefits my boss. And the fact that it benefits me is incidental to the fact that it benefits my boss.
That's right. Yeah.
And if it didn't benefit my boss, it wouldn't be there.
Well, yeah, like when I was in the University of Louisville, the fact that the buses were free for students benefited all the corporations in the area because they could use the cheaper college kids, and they had a free ride to get to work if they didn't have a vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
And that benefited everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Benefited the retail outlets, the stores, and if it became too costly, well, then it was going to just go away.
Yeah, and that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So I understand that, but
and that's why you need these social co-ops, and why I agree with you there as far as
and that's going to be the hard thing because it's Americans have built themselves up on that idea that we do everything alone. But when you really look down at the heart, most of the important things you have to do with somebody else. I mean, you can't have a town with one person. It's just one guy.
I mean, when you talk about the town with one grocery store,
mm-hmm.
The town is able to have one grocery store because the farmers who bring the food in and the owner of the grocery store extend each other a very loose amount of credit
mm-hmm.
that allows them to make transactions primarily notional as long as everything is going well. The weakness of this system prior to the era of governments bailing out banks was that if anything ever reduced the amount of trust between the farmer and the store, and the thing that could most do that was the bank deciding not to trust the store owner anymore.
Sure. Oh, there was a great book I read in a college course about the credit system in colonial and early America, and I can't find it anymore. And it describes how vital credit was. I mean,
and when everything was functioning smoothly based on trust, the money was entirely notional, never actually changed hands, and allowed the economy to be built up in a way that didn't actually cost anything
mm-hmm.
in a weird way.
Well, I mean, there was no it did cost some.
Obviously, it cost labor. I'm not saying that it didn't cost, that it wasn't necessary to labor to maintain this system. And also, it's worth it to say that in a capitalist system, ultimately, the trust comes from the banker trusting the store owner, and the banker only trusts the store owner as long as the banker believes he can make money.
Mm-hmm. That's true. But what I was getting at is that, you did have to pay off your debts eventually in some way,
yes.
with real goods. But even that, right? I mean, it was the goods that were more important than actually the money. Right. I mean, because we had such a small amount of money, right? It was really more important that you actually got $1,500 worth of corn to the store.
And that was the whole thing, because the supermarket needed the farmer to replenish his stocks
mm-hmm.
more than he needed the farmer's cash.
Right.
And so ultimately payment in kind, and that's the real barter system. Payment in kind comes after capitalism, not before it. David Graeber is right about that.
Oh, is that where you got this example from?
That's one good one, actually. Graeber spells it out really well in anthropological terms, all the way back to Mesopotamia.
Yeah, he does. I wasn't thinking 5,000. I was thinking somebody else. I was hoping that maybe you had read the book that I read at college and you could tell me the title. I was like, damn it.
No. This is
5,000 Years of
earliest
Debt.
version of this. The very earliest version of this is central to debt. The first 5,000 years, Mesopotamia, etc., ancient Greece, etc. The more recent versions of this, as it affected French tenant farmers, are central to Proudhon.
Yes. I was just wondering.
On property might have been something you read in college. That was
no, I read that.
That was Proudhon.
No, I read that on my own later.
Yeah.
I went to the University of Louisville. They were not exactly pushing too many radical books.
Well, that's fair. I don't even, but I don't think mutualism is really that radical.
It isn't
anymore,
but it isn't. But this was in the early 2000s, so
I agree that property is theft. I mean, I think that was a great place to start.
Sure.
I think that it's important to understand that theft is from the workers who maintain society and the members of society who maintain the workers.
That was the whole reason why they enclosed the commons in England.
Mm-hmm. To eliminate the whole maintenance of the workers part of things and turn it into an extortion racket.
And ironically, so you got guys like Malthus complaining that, oh no, how are we going to feed all the poor? And that you take away a sustainable means for them to feed themselves.
Well, but that was the whole thing, is that the Malthus was basically arguing for taking the commons away.
I know.
He's saying that people would be better off if the poor were dependent on the rich. The rich would be better off if the poor were dependent on the rich.
Well, I've read a couple different commentaries.
Now, so you can take the apologetic position, which lots of liberals who love Malthus do, and say, Malthus was being sarcastic and he didn't actually intend for anybody to do any of these things.
No,
then the response is, who the fuck cares? The business community took him literally.
True. I mean, I take it more as a warning, right? In certain spots.
Maybe he meant it that way, but that's the trouble. Somebody's dystopia is always somebody's utopia. Look at Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and the way other people have gone to such huge efforts to bring into existence a world that William Gibson was trying to warn us against.
That is true. And they also like Malthus.
Yes, they do. And it's important to remember those two facts. First, they bring about the very world that William Gibson is trying to warn against. And second, they like Malthus way too much.
They love that population problem. They are all over that one. But I was just, so that's the problem we have here, right? We have too little population. We got to bring it up. We got to find ways to bring it up, get the jobs, get the people here, and then we can start really talking realistically.
And and what's funny is somebody who was talking about how more people should be able to move from dying small towns in rural America to the big city was saying, you want to ship all the working class people to small towns where there are no jobs. And I'm like, well, it would be great if people who wanted to could afford to move to small towns and get jobs.
Right. And that's our job as a small town.
You have a fantasy that everybody who wants to should be able to live in a city. What about the reverse fantasy? Shouldn't everybody who wants to be able to live in a small town?
Sure. Well, I have this fantasy, whether it's a small town or a big town, you have to interact and you have to be stable enough to maintain each other.
You have to have a community, and you have to be willing to join a community wherever you're going.
And I think some of our problems is that, as much as I think Jane Jacobs was correct in certain assertions of her idea, it's very destructive what she was talking about. Like Malthus, her fantasy of exploiting all of the regions around a large city, right? That was terrible. That led to decline all across a community region.
Mm-hmm.
And the city thrived and the city was big, but yeah, it did so by destroying the small towns around it.
You don't want to make the city a parasite on the surrounding country. The city has to be able to sustain the surrounding country, or it doesn't justify its own existence.
Right. I mean, and she talks about that, but usually it's the other way around. The city is sucking out all that, extracting all that wealth, all those natural resources, and going right to there. And then, they come back and, visit for 2 weeks out of the year, and you find that you have no jobs. So that's what I'm hoping to reverse that process and extract some out, equalize it.
Well, I mean, and that would be if you could make small towns attractive to working class people, that would democratize America in a meaningful way too.
Oh, I think you can make them attractive, and I think you're right. It will democratize, but I mean, we first have to start. We have to look at the work day. We have to look at all of the things that.
Well, I mean, that's the whole thing right now. All the ideas of an active, democratic, participatory community we're talking about require leisure time.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that the Athenian democracy had the necessary leisure time for every citizen to participate in government was because of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have a substitute that actually benefits people instead of exploiting them.
No, you're right. I mean, and do we really need to work more than 4 days a week? Hell, half of these restaurants are already off for only work 3 or 4 days. They just don't pay a full 40-hour week. We got to get them to pay the 40-hour week and still have the 4-day, the 32.
I mean, and if they're a nice place.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going here by what I'm used to as far as nice places. That you're top of the line, 4, 4.5, 5-star.
Yeah, we have that.
Even 3.5 sometimes. Sometimes you get a 3-star place that's open for breakfast. Sometimes, but not a lot.
No.
And if you do get a 4-star place that's open for breakfast, they do breakfast and maybe brunch, and they don't do dinner usually.
Our biggest thing is dinner.
And so you've got, and that's where I'm getting to, is that your typical 3 to 5-star restaurant isn't open for breakfast.
No.
Is open for maybe in real time, 1.5 to 3 hours for lunch, closed for a couple of hours between lunch and dinner, and then open for dinner.
I think if we're really being honest, we maybe have 2 places that are really open for lunch.
Yeah.
That are also open for dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Other than on the weekends.
But what I'm thinking of is and to be fair, this is what I'm thinking of from my time in suburban Southern California, which is a much larger population.
Oh yeah, hell.
So obviously the numbers would be smaller. But it's worth saying that even in suburban Southern California, the sort of fantasy location for many of these restaurants,
yes,
we're talking about 1.5 to 3 hours for lunch.
That's it.
2 to 3 hours closed between lunch and dinner, and then open for dinner until whenever they actually close. If they don't have a bar, they usually aren't open late.
No. Most of our restaurants are open late, even with a bar. Maybe 9 o'clock. No, not 10.
But the only places that are open until midnight are your truck stop diners and your places with the traditional bar where people drink late after work.
It's been a while, but I think we maybe only have one of those now. One or two.
And that doesn't shock me.
Well, we have no truck stop diner. Our diner closes.
That doesn't shock me either.
Our diner closes at 8. It's open at 7, but it's closed. So I mean, but we still need to get most of the people on 32 hours, more than enough to do most of this work. Yes, you might have to employ a few more people, but that's
Hey,
good.
if everybody only works 32 hours a week, that's more time for them to go to diners that aren't open late.
True. Yes, it is. I mean, and it will work its way out. So it's not going to be a big issue.
No, I mean it's well, that's the whole thing. We're the only country. Now, obviously, other countries are tending more towards the United States.
Yes.
But we are the only so-called Western country that lives to work this way.
Mm-hmm. It is, and it's not productive. It's not doing anything. The studies show over and over and over again that once you get too far past 40 hours, it's worthless. People are there, but they're not doing anything. After 6 hours, most people can't do creative work effectively.
I'm less productive. I'm least productive during the last 2 hours of my shift. I would say that's a general rule for most people.
It is. And, so what? It's 6 hours would be better for your job. 24 hours a week, that's perfect. I mean,
what would be best for our job, because of the way ours works, would be 4 6-hour shifts a day.
Yeah.
Actual 24/7 coverage, but with overlapping shifts, so nobody worked more than 24 hours a week.
That's right.
There's no reason we couldn't do that if we really wanted to.
Oh yeah, that's what makes me laugh. Like when you see a guy like Sean Fain show up in Congress and say,
that way everybody could work the hours they wanted to work within, the available choices.
Mm-hmm. Well, didn't you have to have a laugh at Sean Fain showing up at Congress, saying, "Oh my God, I wish we had a 4-day work week"?
If we're going to talk about national labor leaders, there's a lot of good criticism to be made of Sean Fain, but I think it's also important to note the president of the Teamsters at the RNC.
Well, I was going to get to him next.
No, and that's good, because I think those two the president of the Teamsters really tried to talk about policy. And every time he talked about we're going to benefit the working class without mentioning policy, you got big cheers from all these conservatives. But anytime he actually talked about policy that would benefit the working class, it was dead silence.
Oh, I had a flashback to my prenatal period in 1979 when they did that, the Teamsters. I thought, this is going to end badly for you. You're going to get Reagan back, and the first thing he's going to do is deregulate.
The Teamsters supported Reagan, and Reagan broke the air traffic controllers.
He also broke the Teamsters in a lot of ways.
He did.
I mean,
well, breaking the air traffic controllers broke every other union that negotiates with the federal government at the time indirectly.
Sure. I mean, no one had the guts to go up against them.
Exactly.
But he also deregulated trucking, so long haul trucking exploded.
Definitely.
And now everyone was in more competition. And then
that was bad for the Teamsters union.
That was.
His deregulation of long haul trucking is why the Teamsters are competing with multiple non-union shops.
That's right. I mean, that brought in the owner operator in a big way in the late 70s, early 80s.
And those are the people who, depending on the country you live in, mm-hmm. either invaded Ottawa or stormed the Capitol.
That's true. And I just don't understand how, as a Teamster, how the Teamsters aren't revolting against him. I would have a vote of no confidence. Try to get him the hell, whatever you could do, get him the hell out.
Well, it's because the Teamsters have seen the functional failure of working within the Democratic Party's system of institutionalized labor politics.
Oh, sure, I know that.
And somebody Midwestern Marx, almost always a bad source. Midwestern Marx analyzed the speech of the Teamsters at the RNC to argue a truism. We need an independent labor party. But then, unfortunately, this is ultimately an organization that argues for the American Communist Party, whose director is a founding member of the American Communist Party. And the American Communist Party, despite its name, is not actually opposed to capitalism.
No. I don't know what the American Communist Party is.
Do you have the American Communist Party is the latest incarnation of the MAGA communists?
I know.
And on that note, do you have any final thoughts about your campaign before we wrap up?
No, just stay tuned. Read my Substack. More information will be coming out, more plans. I've got a lot of time to write. I got 16 months. Going to start doing some fundraising after this election because I'm working the polls. And after that, we're going to just get our information out, get everything we need out to people, and hopefully a lot of door knocking, a lot of flyers from my printer in people's mailboxes will hopefully sway the tide.
Well, I would love to see it happen.
So would I.
I would love to see it happen. I would love to see, at the very least, the success of concentrated efforts to create community in our communities.
I would like to see that too. I would definitely like to see that. So
my final thoughts are simple, folks. If you can, please support the show. Like us on YouTube, love us on YouTube, share our YouTube everywhere on social media you can. Right now, YouTube is the only place we are. If you want to materially support the show, then we are on Patreon at Eclectic Radical. And you can make tips to the show at Eclectic Radical on both PayPal and Cash App. If you can support the show materially, please do. If you can't, please share the content so more people can watch it and decide if they want to support it. And on that note, thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting if you do. And we'll tweet at you.
Well, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you as always